Here, record here. Hi, Todd. Thank you for coming back to Rendering Unconscious. I'm so excited to talk about your new book, The Racist
I,
Fantasy.
Vanessa, thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
I feel like this book is so on point for the times we're in. I guess it's probably always super relevant to talk about this, but maybe you could talk a little bit about why you wrote this book.
Sure. I think the last time I talked to you, I was writing this book, actually.
Hmm.
Yeah, I wrote it because, what did I write it? I felt like, so Sheldon George wrote a book that I thought was really good called Trauma and Race. And it didn't really talk about fantasy. And so I thought there was a thing that needed to be talked about. And I thought that, I think there were good psychoanalytic books on racism, but I just felt like there wasn't a book about fantasy and racism, and so I felt like somebody needed to fill that lacuna, and I thought I might as well do it. I guess that's really the. It was one of the. I think it's on the only books that I wrote in that way. Like I felt like there was something that should be said and hadn't been said, and so I wanted. Most of the time, it's more like I just have this thing that I feel like I want to write or say, and it's more about just what I feel. I mean, the personal aspect was that I grew up around a lot of racism, and so it was in large part a kind of analysis of some of the people I grew up around, to be honest. So that's what that was part of what drove me to write it. In addition to this what I felt like was the situation that we exist in today, and which needed this kind of thing.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Sheldon's book, and you said in this book that he read over this book, right, when you were writing it.
Yeah, Sheldon definitely read through, had some great comments for me. Yeah, he was great for the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like his book was essential. I had him on the podcast when that book came out, and it really helps look at the issue in a different way. And then, like you said, this also adds like a different layer that's also really important to look at that's not talked about in, especially not in the common discourse, but not even in the analytic discourse so much.
Right, I think that's true. I mean, I think that certainly the common discourse doesn't, like the idea of fantasy or unconscious doesn't really play much of a role. I talk about this in the intro that there is this idea of unconscious bias, but it's not really the unconscious the way that psychoanalysis understands it, because it's like we need to educate people out of this unconscious bias. And of course, if it's something that's unconscious, education isn't going to help in that area. So that's, I mean, one of the things is that I'm not against education, but I'm trying to think about why education doesn't work necessarily. And I think that's one of the areas that psychoanalysis can really have something to say, right? It's like that's one of the main ideas of psychoanalysis, that you can't necessarily educate people out of their unconscious proclivities or structures, right? And so that was really that was one of the, again, one of the, I'm not, again, I'm not, I don't think people are necessarily wrong in what there's this, the way the critique of racism is structured. I just think something was missing there. And that's what I was trying to add.
Well, and it also helps like people understand like why are people who are so like educated or know better, quote unquote, still
Right.
like acting in this way. And you even point out like sometimes the knowing better is part of it, you know. People enjoy going against something they know better than.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. You know, that knowing better becomes a way of, then you can disavow what you know and then enjoy in opposition to that. So I think that's absolutely right what you're saying, that the way that knowledge can actually, like knowing better about racism can be the fuel that actually that lights that fire of of enjoying racism, right? And I mean, that's what I was gonna, I wish it initially had something like enjoying racism as the title, and I thought, well, that's probably going too far. Like you would, I was already a little like,
Only
even
psychoanalysts will get that.
would get it right, and even
Maybe
the
only
title,
Lacanian
I
psychoanalysts
know
will get
there's
that.
a certain small people, and even this title. So there, I just initially, it was just called Racist Fantasy, two words, and the press made me put a subtitle on because they thought people are going to think you're in favor of, if they just look at the title, that you're just in favor of a racist fantasy. And the evidence for the fact that they were right, I think they were right, and I once had it on my desk when I was finishing the book up. I had it on my desktop, but just a file called Racist Fantasy. I was teaching this big class, 100 people, and I plugged in my computer to the thing, and then all of a sudden, students started laughing, uncomfortably giggling in the classroom. I'm like, "What's funny?" And they're like, "You put your racist fantasy. You have your file of your racist fantasy. You shouldn't have shown us that." Like, okay,
Like that's what you
I
get
don't.
off to.
Yeah, I know, right? Like I put my, I wrote,
This is my
I
kink.
said, first of all, would someone name their racist fantasy a racist fantasy? That's absurd. And second of all, would I show it to you like that? But that's what they thought. So I think that that did actually show that the press was probably right. That just that title alone might have been misleading for the way certain people, think about things.
Might have made you go viral.
Right, not in a way that I would have liked. Right,
Professor and his
right,
racist fantasy.
right. Well, he has a racist fantasy. Yeah, yeah.
So
In
should you
fact, the
talk
original. Go ahead.
what were you gonna say?
I was just going to say the original, the press that I initially sent it to rejected it. It got through. The readers liked it, and the press board thought that kind of for this reason, like they thought that racism. Their claim was racism didn't need to be theorized, that it was just empirically self-evident, and even the attempt to talk about a fantasy was already giving it too much credit, they thought. So I, obviously I disagree with that, but that idea is sort of out there, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the racist fantasy is?
Sure. So my idea was that, and I don't think this is a great original idea, but just I think it just follows a certain structure of fantasy in Lacan, and I think even in Freud, that fantasy involves a subject fantasizing about its access or its pathway to a certain object, and the racist turn is that you narrativize or imagine what I call a racial other as a barrier to that object, and so the racial other ends up hoarding enjoyment for themselves in the fantasy, and then also acting as a barrier to the subject's enjoyment. And so racism becomes this way of, in the fantasy, of getting forging access to this object that otherwise the access is blocked by the racial other. And that's just then I look at that, the way that fantasy functions in modernity, especially, as a way to compensate for certain dissatisfactions that come with modern capitalist society.
Absolutely. And you point out that this is a way that the subject is able to enjoy more the idea of the object through their kind of identification with the person that they believe is blocking them from their enjoyment.
Right. I think that's true. I think that's true in every fantasy, right? That the enjoyment comes from the obstacle rather than the getting of the whatever the object of desire is. And I think, but in the what makes the fantasy racist is that you get off on that racial other. So there's a horrific and yet fascinating structure, right, where the figure that's the supposedly the enemy becomes the source of enjoyment for the subject. And I think that's really, I think you can see that at work in especially in racist acts of violence, right? Because there, you're both, the violent act is itself this expression of enjoyment, but it's an attempt to destroy that obstacle so that you can access the object. Unfortunately, here in Burlington, Vermont, we just had this racist act of violence. 3 Palestinian college students were, I don't know if you probably didn't hear about this this week. It's like 2-3 days ago. 3 Palestinian college students, not UVM students, but students from elsewhere, were here over the Thanksgiving holiday. They were shot by some it's a total racist act of violence. I mean, I think they're all going to live, but it's an incredible. So I thought it was horrific to see that logic up close, and it was clear that was the logic, driving the violent act. So I think I think it one of the things that I like about thinking about racism and fantasy is it has an explanatory power, I think, for both for racist structures in society and for outbursts of violence that occur.
We'll say a little more about that, Todd.
Sure. So I think that so the structure obviously can be ideological and work in ways that are uh, material ways, that not necessarily phantasmatic ways. But my idea would be that the fantasy always underlies whatever that structure is. So there's a way that just the way the society is structured, some kind of apartheid or some kind of structural minoritization, whatever is working, that provides enjoyment for a certain part of the society because it presents that figure of the racial other as this outsider thwarting the full, what seems like the completion of the society, or the way that the society could get its find its some kind of ultimate satisfaction or fulfillment. And so that would be, I think, explains the structural thing. But then the violent, I think, what's as I said about the violence, that you get this act that takes this obstacle, like sees an obstacle to the having its object of desire for the subject, and by lashing out with violence, you both get this destructive enjoyment from the violence itself, and you feel like, okay, I'm eliminating that obstacle, and I'm going to get now a direct access. Of course, it never happens, right? Like the more I love this. I don't know who. I don't love it. I mean, it's horrible. But that in towns in Germany where there had gotten rid of more Jews, those were the most anti-Semitic towns, right? So like the more you get rid of the obstacle, actually, the more you feel like, okay, wait a minute, why aren't I really getting this enjoyment that getting rid of the obstacle promises? Well, then what can you do except think, oh, that obstacle is more, insidious. Where is
Maybe
it?
that's where the big conspiracy theory ideas. Oh, even if there's no like Jewish people in your area, like they're controlling everything, the
right,
spaceships or whatever. It's
right,
like
right.
it gets
Right.
huge.
What's the Marjorie Taylor Greene, like the space ray that's run by George Soros or whatever it is, right? Like that. I think that's absolutely right. Like QAnon, whatever the theory is, it's like the more the less clear it is that the racial other is there and empirically evident, the more it becomes spectral, just in the way you're saying, and ubiquitous everywhere and nowhere at the same time, I think.
Yeah, and the less chance you have for actual human interactions that help people see that maybe that person's not so horrible
Right.
after all. But I think the thing that you pointed out as well is like, I don't know that we can ever get rid of this, because it's like it will always be something or someone, it's like it will just shift to some other sort of kind of obstacle.
Right. I think there is truth to that, but I think I don't think it has to be a racial other, right? Like I think there can be, and I wonder if you think this is right, that there can be a way that you recognize that you're enjoying the obstacle, right? Like I don't know. I mean, maybe that can't happen on a mass scale, but I think that's the idea, right? Like that's the idea of some kind of social transformation, is to see that the obstacle is not just an impediment. It is an impediment, but it's also a enabling impediment. So you, in a way, like you are your own obstacle, right? Like I think that's the
Everyone needs
idea.
psychoanalysis. If
All
we could,
right, I know. I thought you would
we
say
could put
something like that.
psychoanalytic like acid in the water and feed it to
Right,
everyone.
right. No, I know, because what I just said about knowledge makes the thing I just said a little problematic, right? Because you'd have to, in a way, you have to uncover that for yourself. You can't just learn it and say like, oh, okay, I recognize that I need the obstacle, whatever. Like I don't think it can be transmitted necessarily that way.
Yeah, that's the conundrum. It's like you also can't shove it down people's throats. It's like the same thing with analysis or like versus psychology. Like you can tell people all day that, if they exercise and do breathing or whatever, they're gonna be less depressed. It doesn't mean that they're gonna do it or that they're gonna be less
Right, right.
depressed.
No, in fact,
Mm-mm.
the more you tell them, just like what we were saying about knowing better, right? Like like the more you know that chocolate cake is bad for you, the more enjoyable it is to eat the chocolate cake. So that's the problem, right? Like I think that really is it's this whole knowledge problem that I think is, in some way, I think what you said is in a certain sense true. Like it's intractable, right? Like there's no, at least society wide.
What do we do? I feel like we were at this point last time we talked too. It's like, what do we do, Todd?
I know, it's amazing how many people, like I talk to people on little interviews or things, and how many people say, "Okay, now what's your political plan exactly?" Like,
What do we do
like I don't know.
exactly?
What do I know? I mean, I don't. Yeah, I don't know.
Where's the big other?
Yeah, I know. That's a
Why
big
won't
one,
it
right?
help us?
Exactly. Like that's what I feel. I feel like or I always say, right? Like that. I don't. I like. Of course, I have no like prescription for what the exact proper thing is. It's just like a struggle to, I mean, to wrestle with the unconscious, but also to find ways to uh, actualize, I guess I would say, that notion of the obstacle and the relationship to it, right? Like to make it more evident, uh, and to and to find ways to transform the society away in ways that make it evident or make it expose it that what's being enjoyed isn't that is not the what seems like the object. I think that difference, and I think this is maybe Lacan's most important contribution, right? This difference between object of desire and then the object that causes our desire, right? And I think to one of the things that capitalism does is it gives us a plethora of objects of desire, but it does, I think it turns the focus to that away from what causes desire or what gives enjoyment. And so I think that like one of the things theoretically we can do or politically is to try to make that difference evident and reveal it to people,
Yeah, because I
to
think
ourselves.
maybe if we help people understand it, not with the racialized subject or obstacle, but like just in general, like, I think everybody in this society can understand that feeling of like when I accomplished the thing that I set out to get, or I got the car, or I got the girl, I got the whatever, then I feel left like hollow, like, oh, that didn't really solve all of my problems for me. And I think everybody, maybe if we can help them understand how the mechanism works with relation to that, then maybe they can understand, they can like transfer it to this and see how you're doing that with this too.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's right. Although again, as we were just saying, that's a kind of individualized solution, but maybe not. I mean, maybe there's something about that that's transferable, but I totally agree with that in a certain way, it's easier to understand in the domain of car buying, right? Or job or relationships than it is in the domain of racism. Because I think that for one thing, racism, and I think this is one of the things I was trying to do in the book. I think it's so oftentimes the way it functions is invisible, right? Like people like, okay, George Floyd's killed, that's visible. But the other ways it's functioning phantasmatically, I don't think are visible. So I think you're right. Like you have to make like these other domains, it seems more visible, and then you can translate that into the domain of racism. I think that's a key part, I think.
I have to tell you, my last interview was with Emmy O'Brien, this book, Family Abolition. This was a very good book. And it was super interesting to read because, first of all, it explains what family abolition is. It's just not just like destroy the family, but like rather like have lots of different forms of care available for people whose nuclear family isn't ideal, which is a lot of
Yeah,
people.
yeah,
But also, she just does like a whole history on capitalism and the way the family structure has changed over the past like 200 years because of capitalism, and the ways that things have kind of reacted because of that. It was super interesting. And she also gives a lot of like examples. It reminded me of it because you mentioned George Floyd. She talks about him and his family and what their family was like. And then like she also talks about like Trump and their family and like how it's this like perverse what a perverse family it is. I don't
yeah,
know, but
yeah.
it really goes into a lot about racism because of course capitalism and racism like go hand in hand, as you both
Right,
talk about.
are inextricably intertwined. Right, right.
I feel
Thanks.
like
I'll have
I
to read
read
that.
these books back to back because of these interviews, and I think
Yeah.
I have to recommend this combo to
Oh,
everyone. This was
cool,
a really
cool.
good combo to read together back to back. Absolutely.
Well, I am definitely checking that out. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this combo was really good combo to read together because this is like the material, You know, she's like very Marxist material, and this
Yeah,
is like, yeah, the fantasy
the psyche. Yeah,
and how they
yeah, yeah.
combined.
Right, right. No, I do think it's. I think like uh, right. I have like a chapter on capitalism and racism, but I do think that that's like to think those two things together is really vitally important, right? Like because I think one of the things that happened in the wake of the George Floyd murder and in response to Black Lives Matter was that there became this, I don't know what to call it, I guess a liberal anti-racism that was perfectly fine with sustaining capitalist relations of production and then trying to make those anti-racist. But I think that can't, I think those two things are incompatible, right? Like I think the more you're invested in commodity logic, the more you're going to be susceptible to or you're inevitably going to fall into the racist fantasy, into the racist problematic. So I think that I think you can't. I think I said this in the book. You can't really be, if you're going to be anti-racist, you have to be in a certain way anti-capitalist as well.
Yeah, because it depends on it, and like
Yeah,
it talks.
absolutely, right. Yeah.
And it talks about like, how the like, working class white, like Trump base basically, like they need to be white so that they have that, like that's something that they're gonna hold on to, and they're gonna blame the immigrants for them not getting what they want, or the Black people for them not having everything they want. Like that's like integral to maintaining this power structure.
Right. I think it's right. You couldn't imagine it without that fantasy, right? I think that's absolutely true. And I don't think it's confined to the US, sadly. I think it's, it's like in Europe, the anti-immigrant sentiment, right? I think it's
Huge.
the rise, and in India, the anti-Muslim sentiment. Like it seems like around the world, there's that same fantasy structure that, as you're saying, keeps the right wing populist figures in, like that's the source of their appeal. I think is the appeal to that, is the call on that fantasy.
Yeah, that's all they've got.
Right, right, right. Because the economic program is not benefiting. I mean, this is a commonplace, but it's not benefiting that class of people at all. And in fact, it's benefiting the people that are most keeping that class of people in their position, right? So I think that's right. It's not on economic terms. It's all on this phantasmatic terms that the appeal is constituted.
Absolutely. And then they can identify with Trump and how he somehow keeps getting away with everything and hasn't gone to jail yet.
Right, I know. He's a great figure for that, right? Because he seems like a figure of ultimate enjoyment, right? Like he's able to transgress in all these ways, and yet he still maintains his social position. So it's very paradoxical, right? Like he's on the one hand able to, he has this primal father status, I think, right? Like he has all these transgressive sins, and yet he's perfect. He maintains his social position along with that.
Yeah, it's bonkers. I'm very afraid that he's gonna get reelected.
I almost think it's certain. Actually.
I almost think it's certain if they don't put him in jail or something.
Yeah.
Which doesn't look like they're going to.
Yeah, I don't think they are. I think they waited too long to press charges.
It's like this is years ago already. Hello.
Yeah.
Why is this happening now?
Yeah.
Anyway, if you want to talk about astrology, all the astrologers say that 2025 that we will have a evolution in human consciousness, like as a whole, because of some like horrendous cataclysmic disaster. And I just see like Trump's going to become president and something horrendous is going to happen, worse than what has already happened. So anyway,
well, they see that evolution as a positive, like whatever.
That's what it takes for us to get there. Well, those of us who make it through.
I see. So it's kind of like the rapture, right? Like if you survive.
Yeah, this is my theory at this point. It's like, okay, you know how much I don't like Christianity from growing up in it. I'm like, maybe that book is right, because maybe everybody gets flooded because of climate change. Everything drowns, and like the only people that are left are going to be like indigenous people that live like in the top of the Andes and the Himalayas and stuff, like people that live way up high. And then
Yeah.
those will be the only people left, and this version of society will be completely wiped out. And maybe that will be better for the earth because it'll be like less people. They're people that know how to live sustainably on the land with the animals and everything. They're not destroying everything, and they're
Yeah.
not capitalists.
All right.
And
All right.
then we can go back to that form of human.
Yeah.
That's my current fantasy of
Yeah. I
what's
mean,
going to
the problem
happen.
is, I think, yeah, isn't the problem that kind of like the amount of population we have, I'm not sure that, I mean, we need sort of mass production to sustain that population, right? Like there's certain things have gone so far in a certain direction that, yeah, I don't know where
Yeah,
the,
well, we went from like what in the 50s or something, there was only like 2 billion people. Now
right,
there's like 8 billion people. So
right,
that's a big jump in not a lot of time, in my parents'
right,
lifetime, basically.
right. And not a lot of, I mean, and the food production has to, but also the like, the mass extinctions that are like, we're like basically replacing so many species with humanity, which is
It's so
not great.
sad.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. No, I'm depressed.
I know, sorry.
It's
We
okay. I
started
think
out on such
about
a
this every
cheerful note.
day.
I know. No, I
What's
know. This
more
is,
depressing than the racist fantasy?
I know. That's what I was going to say. We started out
World
on this cheerful
annihilation.
note. Yeah, right.
Hmm. Yeah. But that's where we live right now. That's
Yeah.
reality.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
I'm like, I don't be sorry. This is my brain all the time. Or I even read an article recently. There was like some horrendous, drought in Ecuador or something. But then like they were taking all the water, and instead of giving it to the people, they were like putting it to where all the computers are placed. Because of course there's like huge masses of like computers to store all our like pictures of ourselves in the cloud or whatever. And they were like making sure all the water went to cool the computers instead of to the actual humans.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
That's
so
horrific. I mean,
these
it's
things
just,
have a lot to do with it too.
yeah, I know. And I mean, that's an interesting and great example of the way that the destructiveness of these everyday behaviors is completely hidden from us, right? Like you don't, when you sit, just like you said, when you save your picture, you don't think, and you take like 20 pictures of some cat or something like I
Right?
do.
Like I do
Uh,
every day.
I know I do too. Uh, uh, you don't realize that there's a cost to that, even to the phone itself, right? Like you don't see the. I mean, this is a commonplace of critique of capitalism, but you don't see the labor that's gone to the phone, the suffering that went into creating it, and you
All
don't
the
see the damage
children who
that
are mining all of these
who are
materials to
mining the
make these
cobalt, right?
batteries.
Right, exactly. But I think on the other side, you don't see the resources cost of the little actions that we all do, right? Like I think that's really. I mean, I think that it comes back to what we are saying about knowledge, right? Like that the way that you that's a case where the knowledge just is disavowed, right? Like it's not prolific, it's just disavowed in order for this. I mean, it seems like to me disavow is such a key category for the way capitalism functions. It's funny because I think the original earliest psychoanalytic theorists of capitalism really focused on repression, how it was a repressed, like Marcuse for sure, like that's a repressive system. But it seems like to me, I don't know what you think, but disavowal is the central psychoanalytic category for making sense of how capitalism works.
Absolutely. And I think like, yeah, getting us back to work from after the pandemic was declared over, they were like,
Yeah,
everyone go back to work, make sure you get on planes, go travel. We need to get the economy going. It's just like,
right.
what's happening? Weren't we all just like, wow, look, the clouds are clearing up and the pollution's going away and the animals are coming out. And then all of a sudden we're like, nope, back to business as usual.
I know. I know. Like flights are incredible, right? Because when we were younger, I'm older than you, but when we were a lot younger, flights were a rare thing. Like people flew like a few times in their lifetime, and now it's become. I mean, it's it's the wealthier people are disproportionately doing the more flying damage, but it's the middle class on Earth is also like consuming or doing a lot of environmental destruction through flights, right? Like that's a huge part of it.
Yeah. I don't miss flying, I must say. I haven't been to the US since 2019. and I might go back next year because I've been invited to speak at a conference. So, okay. But like, yeah, that'll be like 4 years. It's kind of
Right.
wild.
No, I like that. I've flown once in 4 or 5 years too. That's enough
It's
for me.
probably more reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
before that, yeah, I was flying all the time. Like my
I
husband lived
know.
in a different country. We were going back and forth all the time.
Yeah.
I can't imagine doing that now.
I know. Well, that's a good, I think that I feel the same way. And I think that's a benefit of the, I mean, I think a lot of people went back to the way that they were at. And clearly, like I think airline travel is back up to what it was before the pandemic. So
Yeah.
that's not
We
universal.
can only do what we do, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back to how do we fix this? We can only control ourselves, really.
Right. And, you're doing your part, rendering things unconscious, right?
And you have your podcast. One time I want
I do
you and
have,
Ryan on together.
oh, that'd be fun.
I think that
Yeah.
would be really fun because
Yeah.
you guys, for people who have been listening a long time, you guys have had such a like ride, mind moving and things happening, people dying, and like there's all sorts of things going on. And it'd be nice to have you guys come on and talk about your whole
Yeah.
experience.
I wonder, I don't, obviously I don't know what the experience is like externally, but uh, he has had an amazing trajectory, right? Because when we started, he was just a graduate student. He had just gone from being my student. He wrote his dissertation, got a job. And it's funny because I don't feel like he's any different, but he must, I mean, I must be different too, obviously, but I don't feel a difference in my relation to him since I just always thought of him as equal and the same. So it doesn't feel different to me, but it must be different for people that are listening. I guess I
And
never
for
even,
him,
for him. Right. 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 For him. I don't know. Yeah, I guess I never, I'd have to ask people who listen to the show, but I feel like it's like an equal exchange between us, but I don't know, maybe that's not right.
it's good. I mean, you guys both, it seems like you do a lot of prep work and you really think through things before you talk, and then you're thinking through things while you're talking too. So it's really nice to show like
Yeah, we
people
do
who
a lot
are
of
well researched and well thought out do it in real time.
yeah, we do a lot of prep work. He does more than I do, so I have
I was
to
gonna say
confess.
that. Maybe that's where the grad student thing comes in.
Maybe, but I appreciate it because he often will have like like he'll have the reference on hand, and things, and I just don't. So I feel like it's a little embarrassing. Like I feel like I'm the professor. I should be the more. I mean, he's a professor too now, obviously, but I should be more prepared.
Yeah, but you don't have to anymore.
I guess that's true.
You know.
I guess.
What are you working on now, Todd?
Uh, well, I have a little book coming out in March, April, something called Embracing Alienation. So
Mm.
that's finished. And then I have what do I have? I have a oh, the thing I'm really working on right now is it's the thing I was doing with. Did you know Mari Rudy?
Mm.
Yeah. So I didn't want to do it, but she asked me to write with her the Cambridge approached her to write the Cambridge introduction of Jacques Lacan, and she wanted to do it with me. And so I don't know, a year, maybe longer before she died, we we wrote a proposal for this, and it got approved by Cambridge. And then I wrote my half maybe a year ago, something. And then she was going to write her half this summer, and then we were going to be done. And then she never even started. And then I wrote to a couple of days after she died. I wrote to Cambridge and the editor, and I was like, "Okay, it's over because one of the authors is dead." And the guy was like, "Would you want to do it and finish it?" And I said, "Not really." But then I don't know. I thought about it. And I thought, I guess I would do it. So that's what I'm working on. So I have to finish that by January 1st or something. So
Aw.
coming down to the wire. But I have to tell you, Vanessa, it's very sad because uh, I still have our proposal there, and I can tell all the ways. Every time I'm working on a concept, I think and I don't know what to do about this. I think Maury would write it this way, and I'm doing it this. I'm saying something different, and I don't know. So it's just very sad, and yeah, that was just. I can't tell you how devastating that was to me when I was in California. I was in San Francisco. The one time I flew, and ah, it was just. It was like 9 a.m. We got a call, and she had died. So
Yeah, just
yeah.
really sad. I feel like maybe I could have like a Mari episode dedicated to her. Her work was so amazing. She's such a kind person. She also read through this, you said, in comments, gave you
Yeah, she
feedback in
did. In fact,
comments.
yeah, and so she edited this series at Bloomsbury called Psychoanalytic Horizons with Peter Rudnitsky and Esther Rashkin. And so when it got rejected by the first press board that I told you, she said, "Can you give it to me?" So she really ushered it through at Bloomsbury. So that was amazing, and she did some great. She gave me some great advice, I have to say, about it, and made it a lot better. So yeah, the other thing I would say about her is her. I'm teaching a book of hers. I'm teaching a class called Love and the Romantic Comedy, and I'm teaching her book, The Summons of Love. And this happens every time I teach a book of hers, that it's the students like it the best, and they feel. I think she did such a great job. I think what students like is she brought together like theoretical sophistication with really approachable prose style. And I don't know anybody else that does it as well as she does, really, or did it as well as she did. Yeah.
Yeah, she's a beautiful writer.
Yeah.
Your writing's pretty great too, Todd, I must say. And I had a million things underlined in here that you just have these like one-line phrases that just like summarize an idea in this like succinct way. That's so like, yeah,
Well, that's very
it's
nice
really
of you.
good.
That's very nice. I'm a little, but I feel like she's not this. My writing is even the thing you said, like it's a little choppy, like it's like little staccato, and there's a kind of nice flow to her writing that I mean she's almost like a like Hazlitt or something, right? Like
Yeah,
an
like it's
essayist. Yeah,
literature. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah,
true.
yeah, yeah.
Yours, it sounds more like you're talking.
Right. I'm like a theorist talking, right? Like I really feel I try to write like I talk, and she's really like she's. I wonder if it's too the fact that she's, English wasn't her first language, so she was, and that's amazing to me that she's able. She didn't have she. Everybody else I know that is writing in their second language has to have somebody else look at it and correct it just on the basic, grammatical style. She did not need that, so that's just amazing to me. Uh, but I wonder if that's part of it, right? Like she's approaching the language as a little bit in this external way, and so she's really trying to manipulate it stylistically, or conscious of that, maybe in a way that those of us, you and I, who write internally to it, maybe aren't conscious of that.
It's a good point.
Yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, no, now I'm sad about that. What could
I
be
know. I'm
sadder than the
sorry. I
racist
went.
fantasy or global annihilation of Mari Rudy?
No, I know. The last. I'll just tell you a funny thing. You might not think this is funny. You might think it's terrible. But the last phone call, the last email I sent to her. So I talked to her on the phone, and I sent her she was in the hospital, and I think you know this story, right? That her, because of the Canadian healthcare system, the doctor wouldn't. She asked him to remove her breasts immediately, and he said no, and that she couldn't get in to see another person for a long time, and so
I did
it
not
was.
know that.
That is true. So it's basically, look, I'm obviously for universal health, whatever, but it was basically the Canadian healthcare system that killed her. And so the last thing I sent her was an email with a link to that song "Blame Canada" from South Park, and that's like a funny song. But that was, and so she wrote me back. She's like funny but tragic, of course, and she died. So yeah, it was.
That's horrible. That's also interesting. That's a whole other thing, especially with women and women's rights, is like doctors not being willing to take their reproductive organs, Like I've worked with people and like when I worked in the hospital and stuff that like didn't want any more children, wanted hysterectomy, or wanted their tubes tied, and doctors would say no. They'd be like, no, like you might change your mind, etc., etc. And it's like, dude,
I,
like,
I
dude,
know
like, why is
it's
this
not
not
your.
her choice?
I know it's just not your call. And this guy, it's Vanessa. It's exactly what he said. He's like, I'm not going to do it because you'll regret it later on. Like, good. Like, he's talking to like a woman who is a lot smarter than him. Like, let alone that it should be her choice, whatever. But who is he to say to her? It's like, I found that just so obviously patriarchal and paternalistic, but just so arrogant, right? Like, how does he? Who in the world is he to say to her, like, I know you're gonna, and I was talking to her right when this happened, and I said, right when she got the diagnosis, I said, well, it's just obvious what you're gonna do. You're gonna have your breast removed, and she's like, absolutely. I'm not even gonna. I don't even care about that in the slightest. I said, I knew that about you. Like, I knew that wasn't a thing for you. And then the doctor responded in that way, and then it ended up being okay. So I think her diagnosis was in January, and then she had the surgery in November. To, so that 11 months, by that time, the cancer got to her sternum. So it was just, and then the thing that really galls me is I have quite a few Canadian friends, but on one occasion I was like, look, this is like, this is the Canadian healthcare system is at fault. And like, okay, American system is terrible. And so they have this pride relative. And this person was like, that didn't happen. No, that couldn't have happened. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, okay, you have to, it clearly was that there's something in that system that made it possible for this one doctor to have, and I understand that it happens in everywhere in the world, but that in this case, like, it was the fact that this one doctor was able to have this kind of authority over her seems just insane, right?
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think
it's
this
just,
happens all the time. I'm sure this
yeah,
happens all the time. Like I said, and
yeah,
I know somebody else who wanted breasts taken off, and the doctor did the same thing. Said you're gonna regret it, so I'm at least leaving a little bit or whatever, And it's like, doesn't matter what your reason is. If that's what you want, that's what you should be able to have, And then
yeah,
of course we
yeah,
can get into women's rights, trans rights, and all sorts of things from there. But it's a
yeah,
really big issue. I think especially for people wanting to do anything, with their sexuality, gender, reproduction. Doctors have way too much authority about it.
way too much, way too much, right, right. I mean, she was a 55-year-old woman. I mean, like, she's like,
Yeah, she's not going to be breastfeeding,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. I mean, yeah, yeah.
Let
Like,
her
what?
make her own decisions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The reasoning. I mean, it was solely thinking of her as an attractive sexual object by that doctor that made him make that decision. I think if she had been someone that he didn't find attractive and sexualized in that way, I don't think he would have said that. Right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
like,
maybe she had been much older or something like
yeah. Oh, that's
that.
what I was thinking. Like, if my mom had gone into him when she was 70, he would have
Hmm.
said, "Okay, fine." Right?
Hmm.
Like, I think
But
that
he's like,
really
I'm not
made
going
it
to ruin this woman, this attractive
exactly
woman.
this attractive woman. I'm not going to be the one to butcher her good looks, right? Like, I think it's just disgusting, right? Like that. But it's, yeah. Sorry, I just took us. I thought I was going to just trying to lighten things up in some way.
No,
Oh,
but
I was talking about my
we're not light.
I was talking about my class on love, which has been great. But I was going to have her come in, and so the class has been like, why do you keep talking about this? So I was going to have her come in and do a little thing, and then I just can't. Whenever we're talking about her, I can't get it out of my mind. It's been so devastating, and she was just such a force. I just
She's
saw it too.
wonderful. We'll have a special episode podcast so we
Yeah,
can all talk about how great she was from
yeah,
people who loved her and loved her work. That would be a good tribute.
that'd be nice. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because I would like to do something. I also would love to talk about Nestor Bronstein because he passed away of his own choice, but his writing was also super literary and beautiful. And I was reading his book on what was it on?
the
I don't
Jouissance
remember
book.
which one. Yeah, the Jouissance book.
Yeah,
Oh
it's
my
really good. I
God,
think.
that's such a
Yeah,
good book.
yeah, yeah.
Oh
Did you
my
know him?
God. I've met him at conferences, but
Yeah.
I know Manya was really good friends with him. She introduced
Oh,
me
she
to
was.
him.
I had dinner with him one time, but I didn't realize. I just it was like 25 years ago or something. So that's the only.
Mm.
But I thought that Jouissance book was the only thing. Of course, I'm against this fetishization of the French, so I want to be able to translate Jouissance by enjoyment, but he hates that idea. But I thought the book was great, actually. Like I thought it was really both. There's two books good recent. I mean, that book is older and it just was put in translated in English recently, but
Mm-hmm.
the Darian Leader book. Have you read that on Jouissance? It's
Mm-hmm.
also very good, I think. Yeah.
It was really good. Absolutely. I had him on the podcast. I'm such a Darian Leader fan. It's not very often that I get like fangirly, but I get
Yeah.
fangirly around Darian Leader. And I'll tell you why. My very first international conference that I got to speak at was Todd Dean in St. Louis of Todd Dean.
Love
And
it.
I
Yeah.
presented this, I had just left the hospital. And so like when I left the hospital setting, I was like, I have to keep talking about like what's going on in American mental health because it's so fucked up, like
Uh,
like that's like my mission, which apparently I'm still doing. So that's good. And I
yeah.
ended up presenting. Manya and I were on a panel together. She talked about like working in the French system and with the psychotic population and how they like Guy Danan, how they do things so differently and they like let people have their symptoms and things like that. And then I presented a case from like what we do in the USA, which is horrible. And so I talked about that. And then everyone was like, oh, that's so good afterwards. I was so happy because it's like my first time presenting, international conference or
Yeah.
whatever with all these different people. And then and like Darren Leader said, oh, that was so good and you're doing really good work because I basically like, even though my supervisor was saying like treat the patient this way, I was just like, no, I'm not gonna do that. Like
That's
I was
great.
basically psychoanalytic in my hospital setting to the disdain of all of my supervisors. I was like, I'm just not treating adults like that. I'm sorry. Like I'm gonna treat them like humans because they are.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
No
that's
matter
really
how many
great.
like labels you've thrown on them and how many meds you're throwing at them. Um, so that made me feel good. And then when Darian gave his keynote, he used my case as an example. So like little baby psychoanalyst me was like, oh my God. And he like kept talking about it like the whole talk. He like talked about
Wow.
it. Yeah, he like used it like the whole talk as an example. Like,
So Vanessa, the fan is reversed. Like first he was your fan, then you became his fan, right?
oh, I love that interpretation. And then I had him on the podcast. And then, of course, this is what happens. My computer or his computer, I don't know which one, but one of them wasn't working right. And like, we couldn't get like it working. And then, like, finally, I was like, well, I'll just turn off my video because maybe that'll make the bandwidth better. And so then at least his video was working. But then it was only like 20 minutes because the
uh,
whole hour was wasted with technical problems. It was so
uh,
sad for me.
but you did one more recently where that it worked?
No, I'm too embarrassed from that.
Oh, that was the one. That was the one.
That was my one podcast with Darian.
Oh
I'll
God. Do
I'll
you know
ask
him
him
though?
again later, but I have to like, yeah, I'm so embarrassed that the tech was such a problem. Darian, if you're out there, I promise my tech is usually not a problem. Todd's been here like 4 times. We've never had a problem, have we,
Never had
Todd?
a problem. Yeah, I know. I think don't you think it's probably the tech is a response to the how desirable the guest is? So it's like it's a
My
really
hysteria.
no. If it's a really good guest, then the tech fucks up because it doesn't want it. Like it's just the trauma
It's
of the great.
literally the only time that's happened to me,
Okay,
but it's
all right.
also probably
Well,
the only person that I get fangirly about. So
well, there
it
you
must
go.
be my
Yeah,
vibes.
right, right, right. You unconsciously sabotaged your computer in some way. I think
Yeah,
that
though
must.
I think it was on his end.
Now you should hope he's not listening.
I don't think he's listening. Well, with that, it was really great to have you here, Todd.
Oh, Vanessa, always great to see you.
And we'll do a Mary Rudy episode, and we're going to do a Bergman episode with Mac, and it's going to be fun.
Okay, that'll be great, and I will have forthcoming. The other thing I'm working on is a review of your great Bergman edited collection. So that's
Okay, I'm fangirling about that too.
that'll be great.
Thank you, Todd. I know
Thanks,
that's
Vanessa. See
like
ya.
below your pay grade, but
Oh
We
God, no,
appreciate it.
no. It's not below at all. I'm excited to be doing it. So,
Thank you. And in the meantime,
thanks.
everyone go out and get the Erases Fantasy. Bye, Todd.
Bye, Vanessa.